Have you ever found yourself in one of those arguments? I mean, it could be politics. It could be something silly like whether a hot dog is a sandwich.
Oh, yes.
And 20 minutes in, you have this sudden realization that you're not actually disagreeing on the facts at all.
You're just talking past each other.
Exactly. You're using the very same word to mean two completely different things.
That happens far more often than we'd probably like to admit. We think we're arguing about reality, but really we're just arguing about the dictionary.
That exact frustration. That is the subject of our deep dive today. We are exploring Mortimer Adler's essay on definition.
A fantastic piece.
It is. And before we get properly started, I should let you in on what you're listening to. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis.
Right. We're taking Adler's dense philosophical text and breaking it down into something you can actually use.
And this essay, which is chapter number 15 of the 102 Great Ideas, it sounds simple on the surface.
Deceptively so. I mean, we use definitions every day. We define terms in a contract. We define relationships. But Adler's point is that definition isn't just a tool for being clear.
He calls it a battlefield.
It is a battlefield.
That's a strong word for something that I usually just skip to in the glossary. So why a battlefield?
Because the way you answer the question, what is a definition, that actually determines your entire worldview. Adler talks about this triad: language, thought, and reality.
Okay.
And depending on how you see definition, you're taking a stand on whether objective truth exists or if we're all just making up convenient labels as we go along.
So this is not just about grammar. This is about whether the world has an actual real structure or if it's just a chaotic mess that we're putting stickers on.
Precisely. And Adler breaks it down into three levels. First, there's the linguistic level. That's just verbal agreement. Let's agree the sound dog refers to that furry thing.
Simple enough.
Then you have the conceptual level. What's the idea of a dog? But the third level, the metaphysical level. That's the dangerous one.
Why dangerous?
Because that's the essence statement. It claims to say what a dog actually is in the fabric of reality itself.
And that's where the fight starts. The essay brings in these two massive opposing teams from the history of philosophy.
The nominalists and the realists.
The championship match. Let's start with the nominalists. You've got heavy hitters like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke in this corner. What's their pitch?
Their pitch is essentially stay humble. Nominalism comes from the Latin word nomen, for name.
Right, name.
They argue definitions are just verbal conventions. We see a bunch of things that look kind of similar, we group them together for our own convenience, and we slap a label on the box. But that label, they'd say, doesn't touch the soul of the object.
But Locke went a little deeper than just calling it a label, right? He talks about a nominal essence.
He does. Think about it like the user interface on your computer.
Yeah.
You see an icon for a folder.
Okay.
That icon is the nominal essence. It's the abstract idea you have of what's inside. But you don't see the binary code, the voltage gates, the silicon chips, the real essence.
Right.
Locke argues we can never truly know that real essence for things like gold or iron. We can only define them by the properties we can observe. Yellow, heavy, malleable.
So for Locke, if I define gold, I'm just defining my idea of gold, not the thing itself.
Correct. As he put it, every man has so inviolable a liberty to make words stand for what ideas he pleases.
Wait, hold on. That sounds dangerous. If definitions are just conventions and I can make words mean whatever I want, can't I just define poison as medicine and sell it to you? I mean, if there's no objective link to reality, doesn't society just collapse?
You've just hit on the exact objection that the realists have. If nominalism is completely true, then truth is just consensus. If we all agree the poison is medicine, then linguistically it is.
But it will still kill you.
And that's what the realist thinkers like Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas would say. They'd say, no, reality has a say in this.
Right.
The realist view is that nature has joints. Imagine a turkey. You could carve it anywhere you want, but it's much, much easier if you carve it at the joints.
So realists believe a good definition cuts nature at those joints.
Exactly. They believe in what are called natural kinds. The world isn't some shapeless blob we categorize. It comes prepackaged in genuine species. Humans, horses, gold. And that's independent of what we think about them.
So when a realist defines a human, they aren't inventing a category. They're discovering a boundary that was already there.
Yes. For them, definition is discovery. For the nominalist, definition is invention.
That is a massive distinction. But how did they actually go about this discovery? The essay takes us back to Plato, who had a very specific method, dichotomy. It sounds a bit like playing 20 questions.
It's very similar. It's a process of division. You start with a huge, broad class of things, and you slice it in half. Then you take the half you want, and you slice that in half.
You just keep going.
You keep slicing until you've isolated your target.
Okay, let's try it. Let's define a smartphone using Plato's method. I guess I'd start with something huge like object.
Right. Then you can divide object into natural and man-made.
It's man-made, so I toss out the trees and rocks.
Okay, now you divide man-made into analog and digital.
Digital.
Then digital into, say, fixed location or portable.
Portable. We're getting closer.
And then portable into passive, like a calculator, or connected. You see the pattern. You keep whittling away the universe until the only thing left in your hand is the smartphone.
Plato uses the example of an angler, a fisherman, in one of his dialogues.
In the Sophist, he does exactly that. He starts with art, divides it into productive versus acquisitive. Do you make things or do you get things?
Fishing is acquisitive. You get things.
Then he divides that into exchange versus conquest. Fishing is a conquest, you take the fish. Then he drills down further hunting in water, hunting by striking, until he finally catches the angler.
It's a fascinating way to think. But Aristotle looked at this and basically said,
You're being sloppy.
right, Plato, you're hacking at the turkey with a machete.
Aristotle was the great systemizer. He critiques Plato for what he saw as random slicing. He said you can't just pick any old trait to divide by. You need a formula.
Genus plus differentia.
Genus plus differentia.
I remember this from high school biology, but I never realized it was actually philosophy.
Oh, it's pure philosophy. The genus is the wider family-like animal. The differentia is the specific difference, the trait that sets a species apart from everything else in that family.
So the classic definition of a human is...
Genus, animal, differentia, rational animal.
So what was his problem with Plato's method? Why was it sloppy?
Because Plato might divide animals into land animals and water animals, but then for land animals, he might divide them into tame and wild.
Oh, I see.
Aristotle says, hold on, you changed the subject. You went from where they live to how they behave. For a true definition, the difference must be relevant. If you're dividing footed animals, you have to divide them by foot types, cloven hooves versus toes.
You can't suddenly start dividing them by whether they have feathers.
Exactly. You can't say animals with feet and then divide that into animals that like jazz and animals that don't. That doesn't tell you what the animal is.
That's just an accidental trait, not an essential one.
That's the key. Aristotle was obsessed with finding the essential structure of reality.
This all sounds very neat and tidy. The world is a library. Everything has its shelf, its genus and differentia. But then the essay pivots to the 19th century.
And the library catches fire.
Enter Charles Darwin.
Darwin is the great disruptor. The entire Aristotelian worldview depends on species being fixed and eternal. A horse is a horse because it has an eternal hoarseness. But Darwin looks at the fossil record and says, actually, everything is in flux.
So if species are constantly evolving, a definition is just a snapshot, isn't it? It's like trying to define a cloud while it's changing shape.
That is the crisis. Darwin suggested that what he called the natural system is a genealogical arrangement. He's basically saying that what we call species are just groups that are sufficiently constant for us to name them right now.
But in a million years.
That definition might not hold. We're not capturing eternal essences. We're just drawing a line on a moving stream.
This creates such a weird split in our modern world, doesn't it? Because in chemistry, we're still basically realists. Gold is gold. An atom of gold has 79 protons. That's an eternal truth.
Right.
But in biology, we've sort of become nominalists.
It's a tension we still live with. Lavoisier, the father of modern chemistry, was very much a realist. When he created his chemical nomenclature, he wanted distinctions that were established by nature. He believed hydrogen and oxygen were fundamentally real, distinct things.
So we have this dual approach. In the physics lab, we look for eternal laws. At the zoo, we're just looking for family resemblances.
That's a great way to put it.
It feels like the harder we look, the harder it is to pin down any kind of absolute truth.
Yeah.
And before we get into whether a definition can actually be a lie, which sounds impossible, let's take a moment for mindful moments. Check out our YouTube channel offering AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques, inspiring reflection and rational thought. Okay, we're back. And I want to ask a question that sounds like a riddle. Can a definition be false? I mean, if I define glonk as a flying toaster, you can say it's a silly definition or useless one. But is it false? I can define whatever I want, can't I?
This is a really tricky area. According to the classical view, a definition itself isn't true or false. It doesn't make a claim about the world yet, it's just a concept.
So if I say dragon, I haven't lied.
Right. You've only lied if you say there is a dragon in my garage. There is, however, one major exception.
The round square.
Exactly. A definition is considered false if it describes an impossibility, if it implies a contradiction. You can't define a round square because the definitions of round and square are mutually exclusive. They can't exist in the same concept.
So flying toaster is a true definition because it's possible, even if one doesn't exist. Married bachelor is a false definition because it's impossible.
Pascal had a great rule for this. A definition passes for truth if it describes a genuine possibility.
This leads us right to the ultimate test case then, the definition of God.
The God problem. This is where definition and existence have a head-on collision. There's a famous philosophical proof called the ontological argument.
Right, championed by rationalists like Descartes, Spinoza.
And Anselm before them.
And the argument is, basically, if you can define God, he must exist. Is that right?
That's the gist. They argue that God is defined as the supremely perfect being. Now, which is more perfect? A being that exists only in your imagination, or a being that also exists in reality?
Well, existing in reality is more than not, so I guess that's more perfect.
Exactly. So if God is truly the most perfect being, then existence must be part of his definition. If he didn't exist, he wouldn't fit the definition of most perfect. Therefore, God exists by definition.
I have to be honest, that always feels like a magic trick to me. It's like a word game. I can't define a winning lottery ticket as a ticket that pays me millions and then expect to find one in my pocket because otherwise it wouldn't be a winning ticket.
You're in good company with that skepticism. That was essentially St. Thomas Aquinas' rebuttal. He argued that we can have a nominal definition of God. We can understand what the word means, but we can't bridge that gap to actual existence just by thinking about it.
You need proof.
Aquinas said you have to look at the effects in the world. Motion, causation, and reason your way back to the cause. You can't define things into existence.
Unless you're Euclid.
Well, mathematics is the one place where the rationalists get their win. In geometry, definitions become real through construction. You can define an equilateral triangle, but it only becomes a real definition once you prove you can actually draw one using the rules.
So in math, if you can build it, it exists.
Exactly. Construction is existence.
So in reality, you need evidence. Now, we've gone from ancient realism all the way to the 20th century, and we land with pragmatism, William James.
And William James just flips the whole table over. He introduces what's called a teleological definition. Telos is the Greek word for purpose.
So things are defined by their purpose.
Their purpose or their interest to us? James argues we don't define things by their eternal essence. We define them by what they're for.
His example with oil is fantastic. It just makes so much sense.
It does. He asks, what is the essence of oil? Well, if you're a mechanic, its essence is lubrication. If you're a cook, its essence is combustibility or flavor. If you're a chemist, it's a hydrocarbon chain.
So it has no single essence.
James says oil has as many different essences as it has uses.
That feels incredibly modern. It's almost like he's saying, don't tell me what this is in the eyes of God. Tell me what this does for me.
That is the absolute core of pragmatism. James called classification a weapon of the mind. We cut the world up in ways that help us survive and thrive. There isn't one true cut, only the cut that works for the job at hand.
But I see a trap here, a big one. If definitions are just weapons of the mind, or what works for me, don't we end up with people saying, well, that's just a matter of definition?
We see it all the time.
Redefining recession, redefining infrastructure, redefining violence.
That is the dark side of pragmatism, and it is the classic anomalous move in its most dangerous form. It's a conversation stopper. When someone says, that's just a matter of definition, they're often trying to escape accountability.
They're saying, I have my reality, you have yours.
And Adler thinks this is fatal to a functioning society. He argues that we must come to terms. If we don't agree on definitions, we can't even have a genuine disagreement. We're just making noise at each other.
If I say the economy is bad, and you say, no, it's good, but we define economy completely differently.
You're not even having an argument. You're just talking past one another. Definition is the treaty we sign so that we can have a rational debate.
It's funny, though, for all this talk about precision, the essay does end with a little nod to the indefinables.
The limits of language. You can't define everything, or you just end up in a circle. If you define A with B, and B with C, and C with A, you haven't explained anything.
Dr. Johnson's point.
Right, the famous dictionary writer. He admitted some words are too plain to admit of definition. You just have to know what being means. You have to know what unity means. You can't break them down any further.
So we have taken quite a journey. We started with Plato chopping concepts in half like a chef. We moved to Aristotle's biological filing system.
Then we saw the skeptics, the nominalists who say it's all just labels.
We watched Darwin literally melt the solid structures of species. And we ended with William James telling us to just use whatever definition works for the job.
It is a massive sweep of intellectual history. And the takeaway isn't that one of them is 100% right and the others are wrong. It's that definition is the tool that converts our vague, fuzzy impressions into precise terms.
It's the foundation of all rational discourse.
Without it, we're just grunting at each other.
So here's the challenge for you, the listener. The next time you find yourself at a really heated argument, could be about the national debt, could be about doing the dishes, just stop and ask yourself, are we disagreeing on the facts, or are we just using the same word to mean two entirely different essences?
Ask yourself, are we fighting over reality, or are we just fighting over the dictionary?
Click the link on screen for more on this and other essay subjects. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
It clarifies everything.
Nourish your mind on the go.